I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted, but in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist, but they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning, but I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. Oh man, I can't wait to ruin their night by just spending the whole time talking about how racist this author is. Oh, there you are. Oh, go ahead. Take a seat. Go on, make yourself comfy. Oh, I'm so glad to see you. There's a little plate of cookies next to you. No, I didn't do anything to them. They're fine. Welcome to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week we're going to read The Fearsome Touch of Death by Robert E. Howard. You want to learn about Robert E. Howard? Robert Irvin Howard was born January 22nd, 1906 and died June 11th, 1936. I'm going to tell you all this because I've turned off comments on YouTube. Every time I read any kind of book from a long time ago, I look up the author and I'm shocked at how terrible they were. Hans Christian Andersen, everybody, the author of Peter Pan, was a pedophile that abducted kids and it ended horribly for the kids. The author of Winnie the Pooh was weird and terrible to his own child when the child stopped talking to him. It just goes on and on and on. And every time I say this at the beginning of my show, which I should just rename the show, every author I read is an asshole. And then people on YouTube would just come out of nowhere, especially the author of all the Jeeves stories. That guy was a complete moron and used by Nazis. And man, people come out of nowhere. How dare you? I love him so much. He's such a great author. I'm like, I don't care. He was an idiot or an asshole or a pedophile. Maybe if you don't want your feelings hurt so easily, stop just getting behind an author you know nothing about. Sure, you like their story, but if someone comes and says, hey, there's public information about how this person's a horrible human being, don't get upset. Have you learned nothing from Neil Gaiman? He's a horrible human being, and there's tweens out there that love his stuff. I know adults whose feelings were hurt when they found out what a monster he is. So, I don't know, just calm down. Relax into the terrible news, and just let me tell you about how racist this guy was, which I'm going to do tonight by telling you all about Robert Irvin Howard. I learned that he was famously BFFs with H.P. Lovecraft. They were both published in similar magazines like Weird Tales and started corresponding through letters until Howard's suicide. Besides H.P. always bragging about his travels up and down the East Coast, Howard always tried to impress him with stories about how big Texas was. They were both famously racist. Some people try to defend Howard as both being from the South and in a culture of casual racism, and also trying to fit in with the more famous H.P. When he is quoted as saying in the following in one of his letters, when talking about a rancher being investigated in the murder of a Mexican man, just why so much trouble was taken about a Mexican, I cannot understand. And in reference to a trial in Honolulu where native Hawaiians were accused of rape, Howard writes, I know what would happen to them in Texas. Oh, I don't know whether an Oriental smells any different than an N-word when he's roasting, but I'm willing to bet the aroma of scorching hide would have the same chastening effect on the surviving tribesmen. Ugh. There's also a conversation between Howard and Novaline Price that is remembered in her memoir on Howard. Howard tells of Novaline, I guess you know if an N-word is found on the streets after dark in Coleman, Santa Ana, and several other towns around here, they run him out of town. Chances are they might tar and feather him. When Novaline reacted negatively, Howard returned, let me tell you something. Girl, you don't seem to know. Those people come from a different line. They have different blood. She also writes, in real life, he was squeamish about violence and bloodshed. Nope, gotta keep talking. I gotta get through all this racist stuff that he did and said. But he writes approvingly of racial violence in more than one instance, and in the letter to Lovecraft, he has implied that he knows the smell of an N-word when he's roasting. From a guy that's squeamish about violence and bloodshed. It's kind of like a person that's never been in a fist fight that just can't stop talking about all the fights he's been in. That's what he's doing with, roasting humans for some weird frickin' reason. In his story, Trouble in July, he makes an attempt at a type of nuanced view of race relations, where racist whites use ideology and slurs freely, but the protagonist is a hero by default only because the main black character, Saul Stark, is planning a white genocide. So you get a great quote that are less about showing the mindset of a people kind of locked in their times, and more just sympathetic to racists. We've got to send all the N-words back to Africa, where they came from. They're multiplying so fast, there won't be room for a white person to breathe in before long. Howard's close friend, Tevis Clyde Smith, assures us that Howard, quote, did not like Edwards and Jews, and, quote, would be willing to fight in a race war. So there you go. Keep that in mind as we read this delightful tale. Or if you watch Conan the Barbarian, that's a great movie. Just keep in mind that this guy wrote that stuff. Why don't we go down to the library? Bring your cookies with you, and we'll read this story. Well, there you go. Why don't you get yourself settled? Boy, was that long-winded, but at least it was about something, and not just like the guy from Spooked that just reads his own poetry and short stories. Lately, he's been doing this thing where he does nursery rhymes as an intro for like 9 minutes before he gets to the stories. It's just weird. Anyways, here we go. The Fearsome Touch of Death by Robert E. Howard. As long as midnight cloaks the earth with shadows grim and stark, God save us from the Judas kiss of a dead man in the dark. Well, that was a nice beginning. Old Adam Farrell lay dead in the house wherein he had lived alone for the last 20 years. A silent, churlish recluse. In his life, he had known no friends, and only 2 men had watched his passing. Dr. Stein rose and glanced out the window into the gathering dusk. You think you can spend the night here, then? He asked his companion. This man, Foul Red, by name, assented. Yeah, certainly. I guess it's up to me. Rather a useless and primitive custom, sitting up with the dead, commented the doctor, preparing to depart. But I suppose, in common decency, we will have to bow to precedence. Maybe I can find someone who will come over here and help you with your vigil. Foul Red shrugged his shoulders. I doubt it. Farrell wasn't liked. He wasn't known by very many people. I scarcely knew him myself, but I don't mind sitting up with his corpse. Dr. Stein was removing his rubber gloves, and Foul Red watched the process with an interest that almost amounted to fascination. A slight, involuntary shudder shook him at the memory of touching these gloves. Slick, cold, clammy things. I like the touch of death. You might get lonely tonight if I don't find anyone, the doctor remarked as he opened the door. Not superstitious, are you? Foulred laughed. Scarcely. To tell the truth, from what I hear of Foul's disposition, I'd rather be watching his corpse than have been his guest in life. The door closed, and Foul Red took up his vigil. He seated himself in the only chair the room boasted, glanced casually at the formless, sheeted bulk on the bed opposite him, and began to read by the light of the dim lamp which stood at the rough table. Outside of the darkness gathered swiftly, and finally Foul Red laid down his magazine to rest his eyes. He looked again at the shape which had, in life, been the form of Adam Farrell, wondering what quirk in the human nature made the sight of a corpse not only so unpleasant, but such an object of fear to many. Unthinking ignorance, seeing in dead things a reminder of death to come, he decided lazily and began idly contemplating as to what life had held for this grim and crabbed old man, who had neither relatives nor friends, and who had seldom left the house wherein he had died. The usual tales of miser hoarded wealth had accumulated, but Foul Red felt so little interest in the whole matter that it was not even necessary for him to overcome any temptation to pry about the house for possible hidden treasure. Well, he returned to his reading with a shrug. The task was more boresome than he had thought for. After a while, he was aware that every time he looked up from his magazine and his eyes fell upon the bed with its grim occupant, he started involuntarily, as if he had, for an instant, forgotten the presence of the dead man. Oh, it was unpleasantly reminded of the fact. The start was slight and instinctive, but he felt almost angered at himself. He realized for the first time the utter and deadening silence which had wrapped the house, a silence apparently shared by the night, for no sound came through the window. Adam Farrell had lived as far apart from his neighbors as possible, and there was no other house within hearing distance. Falred shook himself as if to rid his mind of unsavory speculations and went back to his reading. A sudden, vagrant gust of wind whipped through the window, in which the light of the lamp flickered and went out suddenly. Falred, cursing, softly, groped in the darkness for his matches, burning his fingers on the hot lamp chimney. He struck a match, relighted the lamp, and glancing over at the bed, got a horrible mental jolt. Adam Farrell's face stared blindly at him. The dead eyes, wide and blank, framed in the gnarled gray features. Burp, even as Falred instinctively shuddered, his reason explained the apparent phenomenon. The sheet was covered, the corpse had been carelessly thrown across the face, and a sudden puff of wind had disparaged it and flung it aside. Yet, there was some grisly thing about it, something fearsomely suggestive, as if in the cloaking dark a dead hand had flung aside the sheet, just as if the corpse were about to rise. Falred, an imaginative man, shrugged his shoulders at these ghastly thoughts and crossed the room to replace the sheet. The dead eyes seemed to stare at him malevolently, with an evilness that transcended the dead man's churlishness in life. The workings of a vivid imagination, Falred knew, and he recovered the gray face, shrinking as his hand chanced to touch the cold flesh. Slick, clammy, the touch of death. He shuddered with the natural revulsion of the living for the dead and went back to his chair and magazine. Well, that seems as good a place as any to take a little break. Why don't we learn about a latest upcoming book from Penguin Random House? I could say that without stumbling over my own mouth. Why don't we go down to my basement? I'll tell you all about it. It's totally normal. It's not weird. You can bring the cookies if you want. Go on, I'll meet you down there. Oh, good. You made it down here to my basement, which is totally normal and not scary or weird at all. Go ahead, take a seat in that folding chair underneath that naked light bulb, where I stand here, underneath this naked light bulb, and play my guitar for you. Yeah? Pretty good. Why do I let you know about the latest upcoming book from Penguin Random House, Money Shot by Krista Faust. It's part of the Angel Dares series. It's a noir novel. You want to learn about Money Shot? Wow, this is really short. They thought she'd be easy. They thought wrong. It all began with the phone call asking former porn star Angel Dare to do one more movie. Oh, she was almost ready to get out, but they dragged her back in. Before she knew it, she'd been shot and left for dead in the trunk of a car. But Angel is a survivor, and that means that she'll go to the bottom of what's been done to her, even if she has to leave a trail of bodies along the way. Well, that was the review of that. The cover is very sexy. Lady looking naked and sexual, but her naked parts are covered up with one giant $100 bill. That's pretty cool. You can get that paperback for $17.99 coming out February 18th from Amazon, which sucks. Barnes & Noble, who knows, they probably suck too. Books A Million probably sucks too. Bookshop.org doesn't suck. I'd buy it from there. Hudson Booksellers, Powell's, Target sucks, and Walmart sucks. I hate the world we live in. I can't just shout them anymore like I used to. I can't do the whole Walmart bit that I used to do all the time. I feel empty and hollow inside. Well, with that, why don't we go back upstairs and finish the rest of this story? All right, why don't you take a seat, you little idiot, and snuggle up. Do you still got that plate of cookies? Yeah, you do. Okay, well, why don't we continue reading this story? At last, growing sleepy, he lay down upon a couch, which by some strange whim of the original owner formed a part of the room's scant furnishings, and composed himself For slumber, he decided to leave the light burning, telling himself that it was in accordance with the usual custom of leaving lights burning for the dead, for he was not willing to admit to himself that already he was conscious of a dislike for lying in the darkness with the corpse. Oh, he dozed, awoke at the start, and looked at the sheet form in the bed. Silence reigned over the house. And outside it was very dark. An hour was approaching at midnight with its accompanying eerie dominion over the human mind. Falred glanced again at the bed where the body lay and found the sight of the sheeted object most repellent. A fantastic idea had birth in his mind and grew. That beneath the sheet, the mere lifeless body had become a strange, monstrous thing. Oh, a hideous conscious being that watched him with eyes which burned through the fabric of cloth. This thought, a mere fantasy, of course, he explained to himself by the legends of vampires, undead, ghosts, and such like, the fearsome attributes with which the living have cloaked the dead for countless ages, since primitive man first recognized in death something horrid and apart from life. Man feared death, thought Falred, and some of his fear of death took hold on the dead, and so they too were feared. And the sight of the dead engendered grisly thoughts, gave rise to dim fears of hereditary memory lurking back in the dark corners of his brain. Well, at any rate, the silent hidden thing was getting on his nerves. He thought of uncovering the face on the principle of the familiarity that breeds contempt. The sight of the features, calm and still in death, would banish, he thought. All such wild conjectures were haunting him in spite of himself, but the thought of those dead eyes staring in the lamplight was intolerable. So at last he blew out the light and lay down. The fear had been stealing upon him so insidiously and gradually that he had not been aware of its growth. With the extinguishing of the light, however, and the blotting out of the sight of the corpse, things assumed their true character and proportions. And Falred fell asleep, almost instantly, on his lips, a faint smile. For his previous folly, he awakened, suddenly. Oh, how long had he been asleep? He did not know. He sat up, his pulse pounding frantically, the cold sweat beating his forehead, and he knew instantly where he was, remembered the other occupant of the room. But what had awakened him? A dream? Yes, now he remembered, a hideous dream, in which the dead man had risen from the bed and stalked stiffly across the room with eyes of fire and a horrid leer, frozen on his gray lips. Falred had seemed to lie motionless, helpless. Then, as the corpse reached a gnarled and horrible hand, he had awakened. He strove to pierce the gloom, but the room was all blackness, and all without so dark that no gleam of light came through the window. He reached a shaking hand toward the lamp, then recoiled as if in a sudden serpent. Sitting there in the dark with a fiendish corpse was bad enough, but he dared not light the lamp for fear that his reason would be snuffed out like a candle, and what he might see, horror, stark and unreasoning, had full possession over his soul. He no longer questioned the instinctive fears that rose in him. All those legends he had heard come back to him, brought a belief in them. Death was a hideous thing, a brain-shattering horror, imbuing lifeless men with a horrid malevolence. Adam Farrell, in his life, had been simply a churlish. They use the word churlish a lot in this story, but harmless man. Now he was a terror, a monster, a fiend lurking in the shadows of fear, ready to leap on mankind with talons, dip deep in death and insanity. Falred sat there, his blood freezing, and fought out his silent battle. Faint glimmerings of reason had begun to touch his fright, then when a soft, stealthy sound again froze him. He did not recognize it as the whisper of the night wind across the windowsill. His frenzied fancy knew it was only the tread of death and horror. He sprang from the couch, then stood undecided. Escape was in his mind, but he was too dazed to even try to formulate a plan of escape. Even his sense of direction was gone. Fear had so stuck stultified his mind that he was not able to think consciously. The blackness spread in long waves about him, and its darkness and void entered into his brain. His motions, such as they were instinctive. He seemed shackled with mighty chains, and his limbs responded sluggishly, like an imbecile's. Terrible horror grew up in him and reared its grisly shape. That the dead man was behind him, was stealing upon him from the rear. He no longer thought of lighting the lamp. He no longer thought of anything. Fear filled his whole being. There was a room for nothing else. Well, he backed slowly away in darkness, hands behind him, instinctively feeling the way. With a terrific effort, he partly shook the clinging mists of horror from him, and the cold sweat clammy upon his body, strove to orient himself. He could see nothing, but the bed was across the room, and in front of him, he was backing away from it. There was the dead man lying. According to all rules of nature, if the thing were, as he felt behind him, then the old tales are true. Death did implant in lifeless bodies an unearthly animation, and dead men did roam the shadows to work their ghastly and evil will upon the sons of men. Then, great God! ! What was man but a wailing infant? Lost in the night and beset by frightful things from the black abysses and the terrible unknown voids of space and time, these conclusions he did not reach by any reasoning process. They leapt full-grown into his terror-dazed brain. He worked his way slowly backward, groping, clinging to the thought of the dead man must be in front of him. Then his back flung hands encountered something slick. Something cold and clammy. Oh, like the touch of death. A scream shook the echoes, followed by the crash of a falling body. Oh, God. The next morning, they who came to the house of death found 2 corpses in the room. Adam Farrell's sheeted body lay motionless upon the bed, and across the room lay the body of Falred. Beneath the sheaf, where Dr. Steen had absent-mindedly left his gloves, rubber gloves, slick and clammy to the touch of a hand groping in the dark, a hand of one fleeing his own fear. Rubber gloves, slick and clammy, we get it, clammy and cold, like the touch of death. Okay. Well, with that, why don't we go down to the smoking room, where we can review what the hell we just read. I'm coming. Look, my knee isn't that much better, okay? I'm still crippling around the place. Welcome to the smoking room, where if you look there on the coffee table at that baboon skull and take the top off the baboon skull, you'll see that it's filled with cigarettes. Why don't you have a cigarette and enjoy yourself that's my wife's birds. As we review what we just read. It seems kind of like an Ambrose Bierce story. I think if I looked up the publication date compared to Ambrose Bierce, it's probably, I would find that this has been inspired by that. Because Ambrose Bierce is from the Civil War. So most likely, he read The Boarded Window or something. It's like, oh yeah, I can make something like that. Oh, God, son of a... So I think that, it's classic. Oh, a man scares himself to death. That's good. It's not bad. It's not a bad story for a racist, but it's okay. I think learning how much he loved Lovecraft so much that maybe he kind of wrote this to kind of tap a little bit into that the horror that Lovecraft is famous for in his own little Texas way. And so that's the vibe I get from it. Okay, so also, how slick and wet do rubber gloves stay? I think you can put them down for an hour and they probably dry out. But according to this, they stay slick and wet. Also, how slick and wet does a dead corpse get? How does it? I don't know. I actually don't know that answer. Okay, well, with that, thanks for listening, and maybe I'll see you next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people, not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com. But if you go there, you get to hear some of the other stuff that I and my wife work on, like the Radio Mystery Theater show, where we try to recreate the same show that used to be on in the 70s, but they don't make any episodes anymore. So we make our own, and we just steal all their commercials. And also, just in the curious mind, we made a Christmas album. If you go to our link tree, you can see that we made a Christmas album. It's the first thing we did after getting married, which I think everyone should do when they get married, is start talking about the Christmas album they're going to make. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly. glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdlinger or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.